Right then, in this explainer, we're going to pull apart the body's main system for dealing with stress, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis for short. And our goal is pretty straightforward. By the time we're done, you should be able to grab a pen and paper and sketch this whole feedback loop out from memory, explaining every single step along the way. So we'll kick things off by identifying the key structures. Then we'll follow the hormonal cascade from the brain right into the bloodstream. After that, we'll get into what cortisol actually does in the body, and we'll finish up with the really elegant feedback loop that keeps it all in check, right down to the cellular level. Okay, Section 1, the HPA axis unveiled. Let's start by meeting the three main players in this neuroendocrine command center. At its very core, the HPA axis is this vital link between your nervous system and your endocrine system. You can think of it as the mechanism that takes a perceived threat, whether it's physical, emotional, or even metabolic, and translates it into a coordinated, body-wide response. The chain of command involves these three structures. You've got the hypothalamus up in the brain acting as the big boss, which then sends orders to the pituitary gland just beneath it. The pituitary, in turn, directs the adrenal glands, which, as the name suggests, sit right on top of your kidneys. All of this communication happens through a really precise hormonal cascade, which we're about to get into. All right, on to Section 2, the stress hormone cascade. Let's actually trace the journey of that first stress signal as it morphs into a chemical message and makes its way from the brain into your bloodstream. So, this three-step sequence is really the heart of the HPA axis. It all kicks off when the hypothalamus senses some kind of stressor. That sets off a chain reaction that ends with the adrenal glands pumping out cortisol. Everything begins with corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. The hypothalamus squirts this out, and it travels through a special, dedicated bit of plumbing, the hypophyseal portal system, to get its instructions straight to the anterior pituitary. And this portal system is absolutely key because it makes sure the signal is delivered super fast and in a really high concentration. Now, once that CRH signal arrives, it tells specialized cells in the pituitary to release our next player, adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. This is the messenger that actually leaves the brain, gets into the general blood circulation, and carries the message all the way down to its target, the adrenal glands. Now, here is a really cool biochemical aside for you. ACTH isn't made from scratch. It's actually snipped off a much bigger precursor protein called pro-opiomelanocortin, or POMC. And what's crucial is that POMC is also the precursor for melanocyte-stimulating hormone, MSH. This shared origin is the textbook reason why conditions with way too much ACTH, like Addison's disease, can cause the skin to darken. It's a direct biochemical link. And finally, when ACTH gets to the adrenal cortex, it stimulates the production and release of our final hormone, cortisol. As the body's main glucocorticoid, cortisol is the one that actually goes out and carries out the stress response mission across the entire body. So that brings us to Section 3, cortisol's mission. Once cortisol is out and about in the bloodstream, what is it actually meant to be doing? What are its physiological orders? Well, as you can see here, cortisol's effects are incredibly widespread. It's not a single target hormone by any means. It's a systemic modulator. Its main job, metabolically speaking, is to crank up the amount of available glucose in the blood for immediate energy. At the same time, it dials down anything that isn't essential for immediate survival, like inflammation and parts of the immune response. In short, it gets the body ready for a fight or flight situation. So the takeaway here is that cortisol's role is fundamentally adaptive. When you're facing an acute stressor, it brilliantly reshuffles the body's resources to focus on one thing: immediate survival. It makes sure fuel gets to the brain and muscles, it helps keep your blood pressure up, and it puts long-term projects like digestion and immunity on the back burner for a bit. Okay, Section 4, the negative feedback loop. Now, any system that can ramp up this powerfully has to have an equally good way of shutting itself down. So let's look at how this whole system keeps itself from running out of control. This is where the sheer elegance of physiology really shines. High levels of cortisol in the blood actually trigger their own off switch. It's a classic negative feedback mechanism, and it's absolutely vital for maintaining balance, or homeostasis, and preventing the damage that can come from being chronically stressed out. The best way to think of it is like the thermostat for your central heating. When cortisol, our heat, rises in the blood, it's detected by receptors in the hypothalamus and the pituitary. This is the signal for them to turn down the furnace by producing less CRH and ACTH. And of course, that in turn tells the adrenals to release less cortisol. It's a beautifully self-regulating loop. And this logic works perfectly in reverse, which helps us answer a really key clinical question. If cortisol levels are too low, say in a condition like Addison's disease where the adrenals are failing, there's a massive lack of this negative feedback. The hypothalamus and pituitary are essentially screaming into the void, ramping up CRH and ACTH production like mad in a useless attempt to get the faulty adrenal glands to respond. Right, for our final section, let's zoom right down to the microscopic level. How does cortisol actually get its message across once it arrives at a target cell?
This is a really important distinction to make. See, unlike a lot of other hormones that just knock on the door by binding to receptors on the cell surface, cortisol is a steroid hormone. That means it's lipophilic. It loves fat. And because the cell membrane is a fatty layer, cortisol can just slip right through it and get to work inside the cell.
So once it's inside the cytoplasm, cortisol finds its specific glucocorticoid receptor, which is usually just sitting there being kept inactive by chaperone proteins. The moment cortisol binds, it causes a shape change. The chaperone gets kicked off, and this newly activated hormone receptor complex makes a beeline for the nucleus. Once inside, it latches onto specific bits of DNA called glucocorticoid response elements, or GREs. By doing this, it acts as a transcription factor, directly turning genes on or off. This is the fundamental mechanism that allows cortisol to have such profound and varied effects all over the body. So when you look at this whole feedback loop, from the brain sensing a threat all the way down to a gene being switched on or off, you can see it's perfectly designed for short-term, acute challenges. But that leaves us with a critical question. What happens when stress isn't short-term but chronic? That's when this beautifully tuned axis can get completely dysregulated, leading to a whole cascade of problems implicated in everything from metabolic syndrome to depression. It's a powerful reminder of just how fundamental the HPA axis is to our overall health.